I'm Maris, 38, a potter in Cedar Hollow, Oregon, where I shape clay into vases and bowls, crafting a life from raw earth. 10 years ago, Torin's charm swept me into a marriage that felt like a dream until it withered. I'm in my studio, smoothing a vase's curve under the lamp's glow, when my phone buzzes. His text stabs through the quiet. "I'm done with you. Moving to San Diego with my 22-year-old flame. Took all the money from our account, LOL." My pulse quickens, but I don't break. I type, "fair winds," and keep working, the kiln's hum steadying me. I'd smelled her perfume on his shirts months ago, seen his smirks grow bolder. I wasn't blind. I'd already hidden my earnings, tracked his lies with a detective, and signed divorce papers in secret. He thinks I'm shattered, clueless that the lodge he's fleeing belongs to me alone, the money he stole a decoy. Torin's racing south, drunk on victory, while I weave his downfall from here. Want to know how I turned his betrayal into my rise? How he crawled back broken? Step into my studio, I'll unravel it all. I'm wrist-deep in clay when my phone hums against the wooden table, its vibrations slicing through the steady drone of the kiln in my Cedar Hollow studio. Afternoon light spills through the window, gilding the curves of a vase I've been shaping for hours. Its surface gleams slick and cool under my fingers. I wipe my hands on my apron, gray streaks smearing across the fabric like a map of my morning's work, and pick up the phone. Torin's name glows on the screen, a name that once sparked joy but now sits heavy, like a lump of unfired clay. I swipe to read his message, and the words unfold in their blunt, careless glory. "I'm done with you. Moving to San Diego with my 22-year-old flame. Took all the money from our account, LOL." I read it once, then again, letting the syllables sink in. My pulse flickers, a brief tightening in my chest, but my hands stay steady. I set the phone down, pick up my smoothing tool, and trace the vase's edge, feeling its familiar give. Then I type my reply, "fair winds," and return to my work. The kiln's hum wraps around me, a quiet companion in a moment I've been anticipating for months. Torin thinks he's carved me open with this, that I'll splinter under the weight of his betrayal. He's always overestimated his own brilliance, assuming my silence meant I was too soft to see through him. I've smelled her perfume on his collar since last spring, a cloying floral scent that clung like a confession he never made. I'd hold those shirts up to the light, the stain of her presence faint but unmistakable, and feel not rage but a cool resolve settling in. His smirks grew bolder over time, his excuses flimsier. I remember him stumbling in late one night last fall, tossing his jacket on the couch with a grin he didn't bother to hide. "Big client meeting," he'd said, his voice thick with self-satisfaction. "Closed a deal." I'd nodded, stirring my tea, noting the lie in the way his eyes slid past mine. Poor Torin. He spent a decade basking in the glow of my steadiness, my hands that turned clay into a business that outshone his every faltering deal. He thinks this text is his crowning moment, a grand escape with a 22-year-old on his arm and our joint account emptied. He's mistaken. I've been crafting my own path out of this longer than he's been dreaming of her, and every piece is already in place. 8 months ago, I saw the fracture lines widen. It wasn't one sharp betrayal, but a slow drip of clues. His distracted glances, the way he'd linger over his phone with that smug curl to his lips. I didn't confront him. Why bother? Torin feeds on chaos, and I've never been one to indulge him. Instead, I moved. I opened a private account, a hidden vault where I slipped every penny my pottery earned. Vases, bowls, platters, each sale flowed out of his reach, stacking into a sum he'd never suspect. My studio's profits dwarfed his pitiful commissions, a truth he was too proud to see. I hired a detective, a lean man with a knack for discretion, who handed me a file thick with proof. Grainy photos of Torin and his flame at a diner off Highway 5, hotel receipts from motels he thought I'd never trace, text exchanges that would make a judge smirk. I met my lawyer in town, passing it off as errands, and signed papers that now wait in a drawer. Torin thought I was lost in my clay, blind to his game. I was forging a shield, and he walked straight into it. The joint account he so proudly drained, a decoy, a modest $40,000 I left dangling like a lure. He took it, of course, imagining it was my lifeline, enough to fund his San Diego fantasy with her. I can almost see him now, counting those dollars with that lopsided grin, believing he's outmaneuvered me. He's always mistaken flash for substance, dazzled by his own reflection. The real fortune, tens of thousands shaped by years of my labor, rests untouched in my private account. He's stolen a handful of crumbs while I hold the banquet. It's not just about the money, though. It's the game he thinks he's mastered. The victory he's already savoring as he drives south, her laughter probably ringing hollow beside him. He has no inkling of what's waiting, and that's the richest part. I step back from the vase, tilting my head to study its form. It's nearly perfect, a smooth arc rising from a solid base, much like me, I suppose. A customer steps in, her boots soft on the hardwood, and pauses by a shelf of my latest pieces. "These are stunning," she says, her voice warm with admiration. "Thank you," I reply, my tone even as I wipe clay from my fingers, the gritty residue a mark of my craft. She lingers, tracing a bowl's rim, while a faint amusement tugs at me. Torin's LOL rattles in my mind, a taunt he'll soon swallow. He's halfway to San Diego by now, I'd guess, the highway unfurling before him like a path to his imagined throne. He pictures me here, shattered, staring at a hollow bank account, maybe dialing his number in despair. The thought is absurd, but I don't laugh. I don't need to. The trap I've set is closing, and he won't sense it until it snaps shut. I turn back to the vase, brushing a stray fleck from its rim. The studio falls quiet again, save for the kiln's low drone and the distant chirp of birds beyond the glass. I've always found peace here, in the rhythm of creation, the way raw earth bends to my will. Torin never grasped that, never cared to. He's speeding toward his mirage, blind to the reckoning I've arranged. My lawyer's email sits unread on my phone, a note that the papers are with a San Diego server, timed to meet him at his new door. Fair winds indeed. I step to the window, watching the light play over Cedar Hollow's hills. He thinks he's slipped free. I know he's ensnared. I sit across from my lawyer in a quiet corner of Cedar Hollow's only coffee shop, the aroma of roasted beans weaving through the crisp spring air that drifts in from an open window. My pen moves over the divorce papers with a steady hand, each stroke carving away the tangled remnants of a decade with Torin, refining it into something sharp and final. I can see him in my mind back at the lodge, tossing shirts into a bag with that lopsided grin, certain he's left me broken beneath the weight of his text. He's likely on the phone with Lysa, his voice thick with swagger, spinning tales of how he's outwitted me at last. I sign the final page, my signature a deliberate mark of control, and slide the papers back to Ellen. She adjusts her glasses, a faint smirk tugging at her lips as she tucks them into her briefcase. I sip my coffee, its heat seeping into my palms, and let the thought of his ignorance settle over me, a quiet thrill I've earned. Torin believes he's claimed victory. He's about to discover how little he truly grasps. The lodge rises in my thoughts, its pine walls and riverstone hearth as familiar as the contours of my clay. It's been my refuge since my aunt left it to me 12 years ago, a gift bound to my name alone. Torin never bothered with the details, never asked whose hand signed the deed. He'd sprawl across the couch after a long day, boots scuffed with mud, acting as if his presence staked a claim. I'd watch him from the kitchen, stirring soup or sketching a new vase, and let him weave his illusions. Why shatter them then? His blindness was a thread I'd pull when the moment ripened. Ellen leans forward, her voice low and firm. "He's got no claim to it," she says. "Not a single board." I nod, the corners of my mouth lifting in a faint, knowing curve. "Perfect," She gathers her things, promising to send the papers to the server in San Diego by nightfall, and I finish my coffee, the last sip bitter and rich on my tongue. I step outside into the pale sunlight, the chill brushing my skin as I climb into my truck. Torren's halfway to his new life by now, I'd guess, the highway stretching south beneath his tires as he races toward a delusion. He thinks the lodge is ours, a trophy he's abandoning in some grand flourish of scorn. He's mistaken. It's mine, always has been, and he'll leave with nothing but the echoes of his own bravado. The drive home winds through cedar-lined roads, their branches swaying in the breeze as I steer toward the lodge. Memories of our years together drift through me, not with the ache of loss, but with a cool, measured clarity. I once found his boldness captivating, a flame that warmed our early days. He'd burst in with tales of deals he'd chase, his laughter ringing through the lodge, and I'd smile, believing we were crafting something solid. That flame guttered over time, though, fading into a restless arrogance that grated against my steady focus. He'd pace the floors, grumbling about clients who didn't see his worth, while I shaped Clay into pieces that sold before he could blink. Last summer, he'd leaned in the doorway, watching me pack a shipment, his voice edged with a sneer. "You're throwing away good hours on this little hobby," he'd said. "Real money's in the grind." I'd glanced up, my hand still on a bowl, and replied, "It's paying the bills just fine." He'd snorted and turned away, blind to the weight of my words. Poor Torren. He thought my craft was a trifle, a quaint pastime, while he chased mirages of success. Lysa can have that empty bluster now, a man who mistakes volume for value. I pull into the driveway, the lodge standing tall before me, its windows glinting like eyes tracking his retreat. I step inside, the air cool and still, and set my keys on the counter. This place is mine, every plank and stone, and he'll never lay a finger on it again. I pour a cup of tea, the steam rising in delicate curls as I settle into a chair by the hearth. The fire's unlit, but the stones radiate a quiet warmth, a strength I've always leaned into. I sip slowly, picturing Torren's journey south, his phone buzzing with Lysa's chatter about their glittering future. He's probably boasting about the $40,000 he swiped, weaving it into a fortune in her wide-eyed ears. I let him cling to that fantasy, the decoy I left to keep him occupied. My real wealth sits secure, untouchable, a testament to years of work he never respected. The lodge, the money, the life I've forged, they're mine, and he's speeding off with nothing but a bag and a hollow dream. I rise and walk to the window, the hills of Cedar Hollow rolling out in soft greens and golds under the fading light. The detective's last report lingers in my inbox, a detail I've memorized. Torren reserved a condo in San Diego under his own name, a flashy perch he thinks will crown his escape. He's due to arrive by evening, and the server will be there, papers in hand, ready to meet him at the threshold. I murmur, fair winds, to the empty room, a toast to the jolt he's about to receive. My phone stays silent, no desperate calls from him yet, but they'll come. He's driving into a snare he can't see, each mile drawing the threads tighter. I turn back to the hearth, tracing my fingers over the stones, their rough edges anchoring me. He thinks he's cast me off like a worn coat, stepped into liberty with her at his side. I know better. He's bound to a trap, and I'm the one pulling the strings. I stand in my Cedar Hollow studio, the late afternoon light slanting through the windows as I glaze a new vase, its surface catching the sheen like a still lake under sunlight. The kiln hums behind me, a steady rhythm that guides my hands while my thoughts drift south. I imagine Torren and Lysa in San Diego by now, their tires easing to a stop outside that ostentatious condo he booked under his own name. He's likely buzzing with the thrill of his getaway, flaunting that $40,000 he lifted from our joint account as if it's a passport to a dazzling new life. I can see him striding through the lobby, tossing a credit card onto the counter for a deposit, then whisking Lysa off to spoil her with gifts from some glitzy shop. The card will slide through for those first purchases, and he'll smirk, convinced he's master of his fresh domain. I brush a final stroke of glaze across the vase, my lips curving faintly. He'll try that card again soon, perhaps for a lavish dinner, and it'll falter, the first fracture in his shining illusion. I set the vase aside to dry, the clay cool against my fingers, and relish the thought. Torrens' triumph is a fleeting shimmer, and it's about to dissolve. He's been blind from the beginning, too caught up in his own glow to spot the snare I wove. That $40,000 he grabbed was a decoy, a modest pile I left in the joint account to keep him distracted while I guarded the true treasure. My private account cradles tens of thousands, every cent earned from years of molding clay into pieces that sell before he could blink. My studio's earnings soar above his meager commissions, a reality he was too proud to face. I'd watch him lurch home from failed deals, his tie askew and his excuses threadbare, while my orders stacked up online. Last fall, he'd slumped at the lodge's kitchen table, staring at his phone, his voice rough with irritation. "These clients don't see my worth," he'd grumbled. "I'm the one propping them up." I'd looked over from packing a shipment, my hands steady on a bowl, and said, "Maybe they're not buying what you're offering." He'd scowled, his jaw tight, and muttered, "What do you know about it?" That jab stung once, a fleeting pierce through my calm, but I let it fade, knowing my work spoke louder than his bluster. Poor Torren. He thought he'd emptied me out, stripped me bare. He took a fistful of scraps while I held the bounty, and now he's squandering it like a fool, blind to the void beneath his feet. I step to the sink, rinsing the glaze from my hands as I picture the scene unfolding. The server will reach him soon, papers in hand, rapping on that condo door just as he's basking in his success. Lysa will lounge on a couch, twirling her hair, while Torren answers, expecting a trivial interruption. His smirk will slip when he sees the envelope, the words, "divorce petition," bold against the page. I've laid it out clearly. No lodge, no money, no stake in the life I've shaped. He'll skim the terms, his voice rising, and Lysa will lean forward, her tone sharpening. "What's this?" she'll ask, a note of alarm creeping in. "It's nothing," he'll bark, but the shake in his hands will give him away. He'll call me then, his number flashing on my phone as I stand here, water dripping from my fingers. I won't pick up. I dry my hands on a towel, the fabric coarse against my skin, and let the phone buzz itself quiet. He's coming apart now, thread by thread, while I stand firm, anchored in the studio that sustained me through his fall. The server's knock is just the start, a spark that ignites the collapse. I walk to the shelf, inspecting a row of finished pieces as the light fades outside, painting the hills of Cedar Hollow in gold and shadow. The day slips toward evening, and friends will arrive soon, a small gathering to celebrate my latest sold-out line. For now, I linger in the quiet, the kilns hum a soft heartbeat. I think of Torren's condo, its polished floors and hollow promise, and the $40,000 he's frittering away. He'll grasp soon that it's all he has, that the card's limits are real, that I've left him nothing more to seize. My pottery has always been my backbone, a quiet power he brushed off as a pastime. He'd stand in this studio last year, watching me glaze, his voice thick with disdain. "You're good at this," he'd said, "but it's not a real living." I'd smiled, brushing color onto a vase, and replied, "It's real enough for me." He'd turned away, deaf to the orders pouring in, the money piling up, now that deafness has trapped him, and I'm the one rising. The doorbell rings, pulling me from my reverie, and I open it to friends who flood the space with warmth and laughter. We raise glasses, their voices a chorus of support, and I feel not just relief but a glowing certainty. My life is mine, sculpted by my hands, and Torrens clutching at dust. I step outside later, the night air cool against my skin, and check my phone. His text glows on the screen. "This isn't over." I smile, a quiet slicing thing, and snap a photo of my studio's sign, its letters stark in the dusk. I send it back with a caption. "Oh, it's finished." He's floundering in San Diego, the card dead, the papers in hand, Lisa's voice rising as the illusion crumbles. I turn back to the studio, the kilns hum a constant pulse, and breathe in the night. He's chasing a vision that's already ash, while I stand here, unbroken. He thinks he can claw his way back, rewrite this story. I know he's beaten, and the final play is mine. I stand in the new Eugene branch of my studio, the scent of fresh paint blending with the earthy bite of clay as I arrange a row of vases on a shelf. Sunlight pours through the wide windows, catching the glaze in soft, shimmering hues, a reflection of months of growth since Torrin's flight. My Cedar Hollow shop flourishes, its name now a quiet legend among artisans, and this second location marks a leap I once only traced in pencil sketches. I step back, hands on my hips, and survey the space, its clean lines and warm light echoing the life I've rebuilt. Torrin's text, his San Diego escape, feels like a faded storm, a gust that swept through and left me rising higher. I've started seeing someone new, a potter named Elias, whose steady hands at the wheel stir a cautious joy in me, my heart sharper yet open. The bell above the door chimes, pulling me from my reverie, and I turn, expecting a customer. Instead, Torrin stumbles in, his frame gaunt, his eyes sunken. I pause, my breath even, and watch him shuffle closer. He's come back, and I'm prepared. He stops a few feet away, his coat wrinkled, his hair tangled, a stark shadow of the man who sped south with Lisa 6 months ago. I catch the faint reek of desperation on him, a mix of stale sweat and collapse, and it stirs no sympathy in me. He's lost it all. That much is plain. The $40,000 burned through, the condo forsaken, his sales job likely buried under his own recklessness. Lisa's gone, I'd guess, her youthful glow snuffed out by his hollow vows. I've caught fragments of his ruin through mutual friends, whispers I never chased, because I didn't need to hear them. He shifts his stance, his voice rough and low. "Maris," he says, "I messed up. I've got nowhere else. Let me come back." I tilt my head, studying him like a cracked lump of clay, and let the silence grow heavy. He twists his hands, his plea hanging unanswered, waiting for me to yield. I don't. I reach into my apron pocket, pull out a business card, the studio's name crisp against the white, and extend it to him. He takes it, his brow creasing, and I speak, my tone steady and cold. "Fair winds," I say. His eyes flare, a spark of realization piercing the fog, and he steps forward, his voice rising with a frantic edge. "Wait," he says. "You can't do this. We can fix it. Please, Maris, I'm begging you." I turn away, stepping toward the shelf, and nudge a vase into place, its curve gleaming in the light. He's too late, and he feels it, the card quivering in his fingers. I hear his breath catch, his boots scuff the floor, then the door chime rings as he retreats. I don't glance back. He thought he'd find a fissure to slip into, a trace of the woman he abandoned. He found me solid, unbowed, and that's the deepest wound I could give. I move to the work table, lifting a lump of clay and pressing it under my palms, its cool heft steadying me. The memory of our early days brushes through me, a time when his laughter warmed the lodge and I trusted in us. That pang dulled long ago, smoothed into a clarity he'll never touch. He'd linger in my studio back then, watching me shape clay, his voice bright with a charm that once lit me up. "You've got a gift," he'd said once, leaning on the doorframe. "Maybe I'll sell your stuff someday." I'd laughed, wiping glaze from my hands, and replied, "I'll take care of that." He'd grinned, blind to the truth seeding my words. Poor Torrin. He thought he'd mold my path, bend me to his whims. He didn't see that I was the one crafting my fate, piece by piece, while he chased phantoms. Now he's a phantom himself, dissolving into obscurity as I climb, my hands forging a life he can't reach. Evening settles in as I step outside, the Eugene air sharp against my skin, and lock the studio door. The street pulses with twilight life, people drifting by, some pausing to admire the vases in the window. I think of Torin, staggering back to whatever pit he's crawled from, the card creased in his pocket. He came pleading, expecting me to break, but I've built something fiercer than he ever fathomed. My pottery, my studios, my choices, they're mine, shaped from the raw earth of his betrayal. I'm not bitter, just stronger, softened by insight rather than hardened by grudge. He thought he'd shatter me, scatter me like ash. He only fueled my ascent. I walked to my truck, the sky deepening to a rich indigo, and paused to glance at the studio's sign, its letters glowing faintly in the dusk. A woman stops by the window, tracing a vase's outline with her gaze, and I smile, a quiet, firm thing. This is my story, not his, a tale of creation over wreckage. I climb into the truck and start the engine, its hum a steady comfort. Torin's gone, his plea a fading whisper in a melody I've long ceased to play. I drive toward home, the road unfurling like a vow I've honored for myself. He's lost to his own debris, a man who thought he could rewrite me. I've carved my own narrative, etched in clay and radiance, and it's one he'll never own. I sit in my Eugene studio now, the wheels hum a steady anthem to the life I've carved from clay. Torin's betrayal was a jagged shard, rough and heavy, but I shaped it through sleepless nights into something unbreakable, a testament to what grit can forge. His fair winds blew him straight to ruin, a San Diego mirage that crumbled while I built studios and stories. The lesson isn't revenge, though his fall might amuse some. It's about seizing your own wheel, turning betrayal's ash into light. He thought he'd grind me down, leave me dust beneath his tires. Instead, I rose, my hands steady, my tale mine alone. That's my story, but what about yours? What would you do if someone tried to strip your world bare, crumble, or craft something stronger? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your own victories etched from cracks, so share them below and let me see your clay take shape. This is Maris, signing off from Cedar Hollow and Eugene, where the kiln still hums and the light still glows. I'll return with more tales, more lessons to mold. Until then, fair winds to you all.